if you care about the end user experience and what you're creating and how people consume content and how people interact with what it is you're building and spending time on, you will care about accessibility. You should care about accessibility.
But end user testing from people with disabilities will definitely also benefit, because it could be like, yeah, that's not a conformance failure, but oh man, that would make it so much easier for so many additional users. Welcome back to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast, the motivational poster in your ear. I'm your guest host, Nick Goodrum, Director of Accessibility at AmericanEagle.com. And in this episode, we're going to be diving into navigating growing accessibility concerns in the wild. To discuss this, I'm joined by Christina Adams. She is the Senior Manager of Digital Accessibility at Siteimprove. I've been interacting with her for probably about 7 years or so.
Long time.
Yeah. We've done webinars. We've done all types of fun, just interactive aspects over time. So I'm excited to talk with you today about accessibility, the thing we generally talk about on a regular basis, but
do every day. Yeah.
But now to a wider audience.
Wonderful.
And so, we probably need to set the tone, right, about accessibility. Why has it kind of been growing? Why are we where we're at today? And why is it such top of mind? And so, since you're at Siteimprove and you've probably been dealing with this for a while yourself, do you have thoughts about the current space and just recent activity that kind of warrants all of this kind of discussion around accessibility lately?
Yeah. So I think one of the driving factors, like it or not, is regulation that's out there globally, right? I like to talk about the benefits of accessibility for user experience, things of that nature, how it's a benefit more broadly, but I do think the regulation plays a really big part in the awareness of digital accessibility work and the importance of it in general. But yeah, the global regulations are really a big factor as to why this is gaining attention, because now we have deadlines to work with, right? So for a lot of different sectors out there, we're seeing people focused on deadlines, and that motivates people.
Yeah, because it's less ethereal, right? It's not just
right.
we should be doing this, but so much is but we got to get it done by this date or else. And so some of those aspects, I assume you're talking about EAA, AODA, Title II, things like that. In kind of your, the people you're regularly interacting with, right? What are the ones that are the most commonly asked about? Is it Title II nowadays, or is it EAA? Which ones are you hearing a lot more about?
Yeah, I think right before the deadline for EAA in June, we had a rush, I think, of people inquiring about it. I think it caught some people off guard, to be totally honest. And there's a regulating factor within that, right? There is member states of the European Union now can request reports from you. They can seek legal action against you depending on what their choices are, right? So I think there was a rush for that. I think there's a little bit of catch up going on actively today. And then I'd say Title II has been a very big conversation as of late for U.S. public, state and local governments, right? We're seeing a lot of people very, very focused on that deadline, trying to meet it, especially in the remediation side of things, like fixing the legacy debt. So I'm having a lot of those conversations today, that's for sure.
Yeah, and same thing here where it's I'm still getting meetings with clients that are going, hey, I know it's September and we got until April, but we still have everything to do. What do we do? How do we approach this, right? And that's where it's also interesting because I don't think it's also very clear. EAA, yeah, you've got European Accessibility Act, right? You've got a bit clearer aspect of each country has a bit more clarity in their legal structure of what those fines are what the cost would be and things like that. But it's also who's going to get hit, right? And so they're kind of unsure. In Title II, there's also some, what happens, right? What happens? So we're not in conformance by that date. And I always kind of think of how AODA, right? For Ontario, right? They said that they'd be ready by January 1st this year. I don't think they made that whatsoever. And so we don't really know what the ramifications of that like is. There doesn't really is there a major enforcement or anything along those lines. Um, but what I've kind of seen, at least from other areas and other sectors, is like for especially around Title II right now, is influence of bottom line. And so I'm now seeing more from like higher education, and they're worried about like federal funding, right? Because it could influence their federal funding. Um, I've also seen companies that are doing development because they're being requested for from, like higher education, state and local government, like you said. They're needing stuff as well, where they're like, okay, you need to have VPATs and ACRs, right? Voluntary product accessibility templates or accessibility conformance reports. Have you had to have a lot of conversations with clients around like that aspect, or has it been mostly everyone's like, we know what we're doing, we're ready to like move forward?
I think there's a lot of confusion about it, especially in the procurement side of things, right? Especially the obviously Title II relates directly to the state and local government itself and the content it creates, but it also means what that state and local government procures, purchases, puts in front of their users, right? So I have had like conversations with those software providers who sell primarily into state and local government to say, what do we need to do about this? I'm getting asked about our Title II conformance, I guess, compliance from our perspective as a software provider. So I think it's more broad reaching than just the state and local government. It is having an effect on other software and digital producers in that way.
Yeah. And since we're talking about Title II and we did the webinar together, yes.
Yeah. Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. So there were questions and we couldn't even get through all of them, right? Because
Yeah.
there's just so many questions. So I might as well kind of throw out a couple more just in case people that happen to watch the webinar are now also watching this or listening to this, right? So one of the questions that still kind of remained was, what strategies do you recommend for conversations with people in your organization who view accessibility as, in quotes, one more thing they have to add to their workload? How can we help them see the importance of accessibility and get buy-in? And I assume you probably had a fair amount of those kind of conversations. So.
Oh, yeah, all the time. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, the folks that think of it as an addition to their work are likely kind of built into the concept that their work was doing like correct in the first place, right? It does go back to this legacy process that we had that broke everything to start with, right? The reason we have all this work in remediation today is because we were doing things incorrectly for a large number of years. Weren't considering people with disabilities in this type of work, weren't considering what the impact of using certain frameworks that didn't use the correct coding underneath it for HTML, right? So I would argue that sentiment in the first place, like that it's one more thing, it should have been part of your work to start with. But that aside, right, if you do think it's or feel like it's additional work, it is really going back to the quality of user experience for people, right? So if you care about the end user experience and what you're creating and how people consume content and how people interact with what it is you're building and spending time on, you will care about accessibility. You should care about accessibility. You should wrap that into your process and make it part of your everyday life from here on out. Because one interesting part about all these deadlines too, that I think we forget about, is the deadline is for what we've made in the past. The deadline is also for what we make in the future, right? So everything past those deadlines needs to have this included in it. It's not optional any longer. So you have to wrap it into what you're doing, not just tack it on at the end.
Yeah, because there are still folks who come in and go, okay, well, what would it take just to fix everything? And it's like, okay, well, you can fix everything, but if you keep making the exact same mistakes over and over and over again, you're going to have to fix it again, kind of problem, right?
Right. And that's also costly, right? Like you as a business don't want to do that. You don't want to keep remaking things that you've already created, right? So just from a cost benefit analysis, you should care about making it in the correct way in the first place, so that you don't have to spend the money to redo it and redo it and redo it, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that's why I like to often focus on, where it's just there's a lot of additional benefits by focusing on accessibility, right? Because you're often getting some SEO benefits. You're getting better user experience, usually higher conversion rates and things like that. Just because, okay, well, in order to account for people with disabilities, you have to account for all kinds of inputs, all kinds of devices, and usually when you make something interactive for all types of users, it's just easier to use for everyone in the process. So that's why I feel like just the one more thing. If you look at the way I would always approach it is if you focus on the benefits you get from it, it doesn't also, like you were saying, doesn't feel like a one more thing because they're going like, oh, I get this and this and this by doing this. Great. These are all great wins. Another one, another question we can get to because we don't have infinite time. So there was a kind of a question around the new Title II requirements, right? Title II for ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. It is, and so kind of give precursor, right? A large majority, not everyone. There are some exceptions based off size and whatnot for 2027, but April of 2026, a large majority of places need to be in WCAG 2.2 or 2.1 AA. They need to be in a sense fully conform across social media, across all these places. So the question kind of came into with the new Title II requirements, do they apply directly to our contractors and vendors? Or were you pointing out like an indirect impact? So we were kind of, when we were talking about, look, oh yeah, this may also influence the people who provide the, like you were saying before, like the software, right? The software that they're providing in that procurement process.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And I've heard from those types of vendors that this is essentially a go or no go. It's like if we don't conform to Title II, even though it doesn't apply to them directly as a company, right? If we don't conform to that, we lose our customer base because now that this has become a requirement, nobody will procure us as a vendor if we don't provide this level of conformance, right? So it is a little bit of an indirect connection, in my opinion, but it does have a direct impact on their business, so they're going to care about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's influencing people's bottom line, and I think that's something to look positively about because now you have the opportunity, right? Like you actually have some leverage. So if you directly fall under Title II, you actually have leverage because you can say, our organization and thousands of other places all are going to need this. So you as a product need to really change quickly because we can just go somewhere else because we're going to have to, right? And so it gives an opportunity to kind of strong arm a bit more because of those, like you said, because the deadlines make it so that you can kind of strong arm a bit more. So I think that's also kind of a positive aspect for people who are kind of stuck where the onus is on their shoulders. Because I've heard it from companies as well that make products. And if you're making a product and you're trying to sell to federal government, state, local, higher education, all of those places, and that's a widespread, right? That's also you got hospitals, you got there's huge area, park districts, any kind of platform tool that you're selling. If you haven't been thinking about it, you really should be because you will get left behind in that sense. And I think that's probably also around EAA as well, right? The European Accessibility Act. I think it's too soon, but that was also this year, right? That was June. And we were saying it's large majority probably still weren't fully ready for it. But have you heard of folks that are kind of really worried about it that are selling to European countries, even though they may not be in Europe themselves?
Yes. Yep. It is definitely a factor. So even US-based companies who have arms into the European Union in any way, this is a concern of theirs, and that is a topic that comes up pretty regularly, right? EAA is a little bit different than Title II, right? It's a consumer protection sort of regulation, right? So it's like, can a consumer do the thing, right? Purchase the thing, get the information, whatever it may be, right? So that it's a little different in that spin, but in that same space, right? If you are selling into that space or selling a software product into a consumer-based European company, this again is going to apply to you. They're going to start asking you for this type of conformance, compliance, and reporting, to be totally honest, to make sure you're not only meeting it today, but meeting it into the future as well.
Yeah. But the good thing, for everyone out there, right? The good thing is at least in the digital space, right? What's the answer for how do we even kind of confirm if we're in a good spot or not, right? And we've talked about this plenty of times between you and I, but yeah, I mean, really, it's WCAG, right? So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Gone are the days where, like federal government and the US had different regulations than others. Now there's different levels, right? The 2.0, 2.1, 2.2. I believe folks around related to the EAA kind of decisions were even debating on 2.2, but that hasn't happened this year or anything. So we don't know when that might happen. But the good thing is it's, kind of the source of truth. But I guess, it's been around for a long time. So if WCAG's always been around, it's always been the source of truth and it's been the great way to do it. You kind of started to allude to it, but why did we end up where we are today, right? Like, I think that's some good kind of background as well. It's like, why is this still such a growing concern after, I mean, really WCAG 1.0 was 99, right? So, we're like 26 years here.
Yeah. Yeah. So why didn't we solve it 26 years
why
ago?
didn't we solve it 26? I mean, and even 15 or it's like, why is it still so pervasive? And I didn't know if you had any thoughts of your own of like what you've kind of seen.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't been a priority, unfortunately, until the regulation comes into play. Truthfully, I don't love the fact that regulation drives a lot of this initiative, right? It should be based in doing the most good for your users, but it is true it didn't have the awareness until, government started producing law for it, right? But it also stems from more users being able to voice their concerns. I think like the uptick of people bringing the awareness, the user groups, the disability groups, actually bringing a voice to this too made an impact on this uptick of it as well, because we got here through a long term neglect of our digital experiences, right? HTML, semantic HTML has been a thing since semantic HTML was created, which is kind of at the start of the internet, right? We have ways of creating things that were subverted a lot of times because people didn't know better or didn't understand that there was underlying reasons for that, for building this type of work, right? Building websites in particular. So we do have a lot of legacy debt to overcome. And I think because awareness wasn't great previously, kind of kicked that can down the road. We just said, it's not going to be my focus. We don't have the time, resource, money, until, I guess, more awareness from the user groups and people with disabilities in general, like bringing awareness to this, but also regulation in conjunction with those groups as well. Brought awareness to it to push it forward, to say, not optional. And yes, we need to fix it. It's now your problem. You do have to deal with it.
Yeah. And kind of related to that, I think it's because nowadays the web is not optional, right? It's,
right.
Probably early on when, in its infancy, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of places their argument was like, you can still call us, you can still go on in person, you can still, like, there's many ways of doing this without needing to be on the web. And then now with just, again, continued acceleration into, it's like everyone's on mobile devices, everyone's just constantly on the web. There's actually just whole businesses where it's like, there's no physical place. And now with AI chatbots and things like that, it's almost like there's not even real call centers right now. And so it's what's the alternative? If I can't get this information from the web, if I can't get it from your mobile applications, if I can't get it there, how else am I supposed to get it? Because I can't. And I think that's important as well. But the nice part is that, like you were saying, HTML and a lot of these base aspects they just already have accessibility built in. Like, it's much easier. I always think about like the comparison of, PDF and print and all of these things for materials for individuals with low vision or blindness. And it's like, well, now you can get all that easily through digital aspects, right? And so it's just a lot easier for, it's a lot more open and access friendly, and not just from disability, but also access from international aspect, right? Rather than just something local, you can actually spread it and share it. So um, I think that has an influence as well, is because probably more and more businesses realized, oh, actually, yeah, this is where I make most of my money. It's not really in the physical space anymore. It's all in the digital space. So I think that has an influence as well. But you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just tagging onto that too. I think the cost model for businesses flipped, right? Because as the technology got for digital content got better, more easy to access, more quick to build, that technology cost went down, whereas the physical space cost went up, right?
Mm,
So I actually think the cost model of the business flipped a bit. It'd be an interesting research project for anybody out there, but honestly, like I think the digital space became cheaper to manage in a way, so they put more time and effort and money into that. The physical space diminished. The going into an office to talk to someone on a phone, to call into a call center, that part became the expensive part. The website, the e-commerce website or whatever it is your business is, became the more affordable and more profitable option, right? So again, pushing the initiative of we need to dedicate more time into the user experience and making sure people have access to this. Because again, for somebody to reach a barrier with their assistive technology on a website is going to cost us money because now that person has to call into our call center and have a human, interact with them, and that causes a bunch of risk and other things too. But we're trying to avoid those costly in-person pieces of the business and make sure the website is functioning as it should for everybody.
yeah. And then I think another aspect on why we're here where we are today is probably and I can say this because I was also a developer and I still am developing. Is developers we're partially to blame as well.
We're definitely partially to blame. Yes, I was also a developer, so I feel guilty and I have made mistakes in the past that I am atoning for today about making inaccessible things previously. But yes, that is certainly a part of it as well.
So part of it for everyone out there is just that may not be in the development space, right? Is that nowadays there's actually a lot of tools, there's a lot of support, there's a lot of information than, 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't that there wasn't any information or any of that. But a lot of the popular like JS frameworks and new fanciest approaches to building things, they didn't even include examples that would account for accessibility. They developed without thinking about that. It's not to say that none of them ever did it, right? I mean, there was effort from, even back in the day for jQuery UI and places like that, where they're like, we're trying to account for it. But it still was kind of far apart on a lot of different tools, and in a bit Wild West of just like, oh, I need this tool. Oh, look, that does that. Okay, I'm just going to pull it into my source code, and now I'm using this plugin. Sweet. But now that I look back on it, right? Not me personally, but it's like those types of situations come in where it's like, oh, now it's completely inaccessible because of the framework I chose. So have you seen upticks in any kind of have you been looking at any kind of the resource libraries and some of the frameworks out there? Have you seen larger upticks in accessibility being included? I always like to go into GitHub and just pretty much just go okay, this is a public repository. Let me just take a quick peek and go, what are the issues and what's under A11Y or under accessibility, and finding the number of issues or items solved.
Yeah, I think more people are asking questions about it. So yeah, for especially these open source open documentation spaces, I think more people are asking about it. So I do think the frameworks that are probably the most popular out there are taking it into be more proactive about it, right? To produce that documentation, to produce that I guess process for people to follow. So I do think it's better than it was. It still doesn't prevent people from doing whatever they want within that framework. And so we do still see issues, right? It does take a certain level of individual awareness of the person that's using that framework to to self-edit and make sure that they use the correct markup, the correct structure, and those sorts of things, and follow that type of documentation. Because most of those frameworks allow for enough freedom and flexibility in what you create. The nice part is you can make anything out of anything on, the internet, but you shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
Is the take home message that we always try to hit home. But so it does take, yes, they are documenting it better, the frameworks themselves, about what you should do with the tool, with the framework, but the individual still has to have some responsibility in that conversation too.
Yeah, because the amount of times where as a front on the front end side, right, and it'd be like CSS hack workaround, so you don't have to use any JavaScript. All it requires is this really weird mixture of my favorite is an expanding collapse with no JavaScript. All it takes is an input and label, and then being able to press the label to checkbox, and then once you check the checkbox, then it like opens and closes like siblings, and yes, there's novelty in doing that. And yes, you can do things 1,000 different ways, but there's literally in HTML, there's just details summary, and that does everything that you need with no JavaScript. So
Right.
now again, a lot of those hacks, part of it is legacy too, right? Because, it was, how do we do this 15 years ago, 10 years ago, versus a lot of the newer HTML5, which solves a lot of the problems I feel nowadays as well. A lot of the native stuff out there, at least in the HTML space, really solves a lot of those pain points nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the hacks exist, I guess, still, and they persist because people like that creativity, right? Like that you are doing something interesting with things that are generic containers and some JavaScript, and it's kind of fun to get that type of thing to work. But you have to remember, when you do that type of customization, you are now responsible to add all of the functionality that you got for free using this, default semantic elements in place. You now have to code all of that and maintain it forever. And I think that's the part that gets people to say, oh, never mind, I don't want to maintain thousands of lines of JavaScript just to get an accordion to work, right?
Yeah.
That use the summary details. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I often, when I was like onboarding people in the development space, and I'd be, okay, recreate a select dropdown, right? Recreate, it looks easy enough, right? And they're like, okay, yeah. And then once they realize that the amount of keyboard commands you have to pay attention to, the amount of feedback and states and everything along those lines, they're like, oh, that wasn't that much fun. And I was like, yeah, that's why they already developed it. And there you go. It's already available. Now you don't have to do that. It's
exactly.
just use that.
Yeah. And I think it scared a lot of people off, the default styling and things like that.
True. That was
I was also a
too.
designer, so I can also blame myself for the design part of it too. But designers got in the way and said,
I need that carrot. I need it to
Yeah.
be that particular color and shade. And
Yeah.
browsers didn't let me do it. So I need to make custom. But now actually a lot of those are all customizable as well. So on the development side, it is a much nicer space. So if anyone's fearful, you're in much better hands nowadays, because there's a lot more freedom with it.
Yeah, the CSS has come a long way in allowing customization for a lot of those default HTML elements that we prefer, right? For functionality purposes, for maintenance purposes, for accessibility purposes. You can now pretty much make them look however you want. Couple limitations within that, but it's a lot better than it used to be now.
And speaking of design, then I think there's also a couple of trends that I've seen over time that are very, I would say, web specific, right? They kind of emerged there, but weren't really used in any of the other software. And the most common one, people might have heard it from me sometime in the past, is like hover, right? And I still have to have hover conversations, hover-based functionality. And I go, that's literally one user type, and probably not even your major user type, since most people are on their devices nowadays. But it really dawned in early web development, I feel like, because if you look at all your other software, it's none of the functionality is ever hover based. It's always click based. It's always press based. Could be right click, could be a couple other things. So it's not that it's all keyboard perfect, but it wasn't really hover based. So I was always kind of confused why it kind of came about.
It is really interesting that it's an experience that people, really dove into and made a core experience, and it's based off of one device. It's one tool. It's a mouse, right? That type of pointer device that we made an entire navigation system around at one point, right? It was all hover based. And I'm sure everybody had this experience too, where like if you were a mouse user and you hover over that navigation, you move your mouse ever so slightly off of it, it disappears and you lose your place and it's you gotta go back. And it's just not an efficient thing in general. So yeah, still confused as to why that took off the way it did. Glad we're moving away from it. People realize it's not a great experience and it doesn't necessarily translate to a touch-based
Yeah.
experience, right? Like a phone, a tablet, mobile device. Yeah, it's very fast. That one puzzles me too. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, and I've seen actually a lot of e-commerce places that are doing infinite scroll, right? And so it's just all your products and it's an experience. And I go, I understand. And Facebook and the like, the reason why they had that to a degree is to captivate the audience and keep them going, right? Doom scroll into the night, right? Um, but there's time and place, right? And I always it's interesting where but it's like, oh, cool factor. Oh, they did that. I want to do that. And
Yeah.
but that's where I feel like a lot of people are realizing over time, but it's like, but you want the conversions, right? You want the end user to buy the product. And I always find it interesting where it's like, oh, whenever someone tries to show me something in social media and they're like, oh, I was going to just show this to, oh, it refreshed. I can't show it to you ever again. It's gone.
It's gone. It's
It's
gone
gone.
forever.
It's gone forever. I won't be able to find it again. Good
Yep.
luck. And I was like,
Moment in time.
you wouldn't want that for your e-commerce experience because you're like, I want to show you this. Oh, it refreshed and I know I got to go scroll through like 50 other items, right? Like,
Right.
it's not really the time. It's like time and place, right? So experiential versus like conversion based, like there's places, but I do see where it's like, oh, the cool social media does this, therefore all of the other sites want to do it. But it's like, I always kind of feel it's time and place, and it has major accessibility implications because if you have 1,000 items, imagine a keyboard user having to literally go through 1,000 items to reach the footer, and it's like, that's a horrible experience.
Right. Or my favorite too was that when that became popular, the infinite scroll like took off, right? Social media influenced. There were companies that just were like, yeah, we need infinite scroll. And so they didn't redesign their page at all. They just said, yeah, infinite scroll on the main content. Awesome. Forgetting that they had content in the footer and below the main content area that you could never get to. It's an infinite scroll. It's going to go forever. You're never going to get to those links in the footer.
Maybe
so
eventually.
if you're tracking anything in there, like click wise, like analytics wise, you would have seen a huge drop off of people being able to use that because literally you prevented access to that for everyone because you infinite scrolled in the middle, right?
Yep.
So it's like, and then people got wise and said, oh yeah, if we have an infinite scroll, nothing can be below it. And so a lot of that's been repaired now, but there was a phase there when infinite scroll got popular that was wild to see that you couldn't get down to the actual clickable links at the bottom of the page because infinite scroll got in the way.
Yeah, in that sense, right? So hopefully that paints a bit of a picture. So if anyone's like, why isn't that everything just is already, everything is as accessible, and why is it that I can't just buy something off the shelf and just be like, everything's taken care of, right? And it's just because there's a deep rooted history, right? And so kind of giving you a lay of the land of that. But that doesn't answer you like, what are you supposed to do, right? And so I'm sure you've had to also explain this a fair amount, but what do you find companies or organizations, what's the pattern or what's the approach that actually turns into success? Not just, okay, we did something and then we fall behind again, right? Like, have you seen success approaches and what were those?
Yeah, what works the best is being proactive about this, right? So kind of we mentioned it early up in the conversation, right? Shifting left, making sure this is part of your entire process. We call it shifting left because you think about the product or content development lifecycle as a linear piece, right? So if we shift left earlier and earlier into the creation of new content or experiences, that's where we want to start incorporating thought around accessibility. We want to make sure we're designing for it, even at our requirements gathering phase. We want to make sure it's part of their daily work through every single stage that new experience goes through. There are tasks for everybody within this, and part of that inclusive design process. It's part of that shift left concept. But that's been the most successful because if you're just in a remediation only cycle, just fix what's out there, fix what's out there, fix what's broken, you're going to keep making bad things that break that you then have to continue with the cycle forever. If you're proactive, you're successfully reducing the amount of issues out there over time. So then you're left with less and less, and hopefully none at some glorious point in time,
Yeah.
right?
No, and that's especially I've been seeing with the Title II space where it's just everyone panicking for having like 20,000 PDFs, and they're going, okay, I just got to solve them all, and you go, really, you got to solve your process, right? And so
Right.
that's where is that when we're talking about shifting left in that sense, and it's that proactiveness is go figure out what your gaps are, right? Do the testing, do the analysis, get a sense on where the common culprits, and then from there go, okay, now we need to train, right? We need to educate so we pick the right path forward so we end up with much better documents. But that applies to everything, right? So same thing from code bases. So really testing still needs to be a regular involvement. So yes, planning for it, in the business analyst side, in the design side, really all of this still should have accessibility because it's going to make better interfaces in the long run. But then also from there, how do we maintain it, right? Because I would love to say like, no one ever makes a mistake ever. There's not a phrase like to err is to be human or anything like that, right? We are perfect beings. And
Perfect.
so
Yeah.
no checks and balances necessary. You're right. There you go. Solved.
Right.
But no, the reality is no, that's why we need checks and balances. We need to have review processes.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, right? Because a lot of people do ask is like, all right, I buy a tool and that's it. That's all I need to care about. Or I just put it in my development cycle and put it into my build tools and then I'm done. Like what is your take, right, on that kind of automation, human involvement, like and even kind of in platform being involved around platforms yourself, like what's your approach to this? What do you see success from?
Yeah, I mean, I work for a company that has a tool, right? So Siteimprove obviously has our automated check system, but it's a big part of a strategy. It's a big part of a program because it gives you visibility across everything, right? Tools are great for that. We inventory everything, we check everything to a point, right? But there are requirements that we have to meet that are not able to be automated. So hybrid testing is always what we recommend in somebody building a program like this. And again, because there are aspects of digital accessibility work that apply to every part of this development lifecycle, content development or product development, depending on what you're creating, right? So there are pieces of this in every part of that process and that cycle in general. And so the tooling is going to, and the support needed is going to change depending on that. So automated testing, great. Testing in your development pipelines, awesome. But also manual testing, having a user actually give you feedback on what you are creating, hopefully pre-launch even, right? On a pre-production, even better testing, getting a human involved, getting that feedback in place, because there are things that we can't automate today and probably never will, and frankly shouldn't, because WCAG is based in human perception, right? It's a human using a website being able to accomplish something or consume something, right? We want to make sure that's the goal. So automated tools never going to fully realize that. It's going to be a useful thing, especially with AI enhancements, WCAG coverage, those sorts of things. All the rage to talk about now in our space, for sure, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen. But we're actively seeking how to stretch that with AI, but it's never going to replace that human. The human in the loop, the human involvement and feedback is still a critical piece of it.
Yeah, and actually that's where I suggest for depending on where clients are in their maturity around accessibility is not just conformance testing, but end user testing.
Yes.
And because those are slightly different. Because conformance testing, you can make a conformant website that's still not easy to use. Usually not. It's harder, but it is possible that there's just aspects that just don't translate as well. Probably because maybe it's the particular users of that tool or the site, or it's demographics, right? That all influences things. but end user testing from people with disabilities will definitely also benefit, because it could be like, yeah, that's not a conformance failure, but oh man, that would make it so much easier for so many additional users. So it's kind of those kind of steps where it'd be like, yeah, if you got some automation in, great. You then also need human involvement to really check for conformance and see where the pain points are. And then, oh, from there, get end users so you can actually really, true end users even would be best, where it's like, hey, someone is actually using the website and found it difficult. Okay, where did they find that difficult? Okay, let's improve that process overarching. And you might even come up with even better ideas for your website that go beyond conformance.
Yeah, a lot of the times when we do user testing, like user usability testing, not conformance testing, right? Getting that user feedback in place, it actually has pretty big implications on how we've designed some of our design assumptions that of how we built our product in general. So those aren't something a conformance test is going to find. It's really about better design for everyone, for all users. It's content design. It's functionality that makes more sense, and it challenges our assumptions as we produced it, right? And that can be extremely enlightening, to not only better your product as a whole, but like your brand reputation and other cascading benefits of that as well.
Yep. I think one other area to consider, maybe there's two other areas, right? So it's testing cycles, remediation cycles, but generally it's about shifting left as much as possible to try and prevent that. But then, of course, there is maintenance levels to just keep it up. And then, to me, the other two areas are kind of the content, right? The content authors filling in the gaps, making sure there's explanations on how to enter it correctly. That's why you get into this kind of PDF nightmare sometimes for organizations. Does it need to be a PDF? Could it be processes? But then also, I think we're talking about earlier, where it's the procurement side, right? Who is purchasing the software? Who's buying the third party? Who's vetting those things? And I think if you kind of tackle those areas, you should feel more confident in your, site confidence, right? In your, the usability of your website. Are there any other areas you feel that should be considered as well?
I mean, pretty well covered there. I think the procurement side is a big one we get questions about too. I think there's a lot of factors within that, right? A lot of times organizations don't know who is actually procuring anything. So that just might be a more larger conversation organizationally you have to make sure those checks and balances are in place for who gets to purchase what, and then what are the requirements for that. I do think there are some gaps in that today that are difficult to answer for a lot of companies. But I do agree, like I think if you're taking all these things into consideration, you will be in such a better place than for, especially if we're talking about regulation, if we're bringing it back to that, right? You're going to be in a much better place if you can show this like almost organic thought process about your organization as a whole and all of these pieces that you are addressing accessibility within. Even if you won't have 100% check mark, like certified, that doesn't exist, certified accessible site, it's not realistic. It's a constantly moving target because we produce new content constantly, right?
Yeah.
It's a living, breathing animal almost.
Yeah, and I think that's the struggle for a lot of places too, because it's just like IT's running it or marketing is running it, and it's like there's many other people in your organization. You should have some higher level organizational conversations to figure out what's your true policy and approach. That way, you also get leadership, because it's also, if it's IT and they go, but we've only got a budget of like $50, and what can we do, right? And
Right.
that's going to get you a very different answer than what is actually necessary and actually showing some due diligence. Um,
Yeah.
but all right, so hopefully it gives folks just a little bit of a sense of what you should be thinking about, some of the different areas. But I figure then it'll be interesting to kind of get into what are common culprits, right? So what are the things people are dealing with that you're seeing? Again, from a platform perspective, you probably see it's like we get thousands of A or hundreds of B, right? But just in general too, is there anything that kind of stood out to you from patterns or just even interesting oddities that you run into?
Yeah. I mean, not to dive into the deep end immediately, but ARIA is a problem. It's a great tool if used appropriately. But I think a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals, especially developers, usually a developer who'd be implementing this, say, all right, I need to make things accessible. I'm going to dive into the deep end on ARIA and put it on everything. That usually becomes a problem. There's very few instances of that being successful or maintainable into the future as well. So we flag a lot of ARIA issues that is outside of the general conformance, standard check process, but it is usually uh, causing conformance issues as well. But so one of the main ones is ARIA label. Putting ARIA labels on everything, right, is not necessary. I'd use that with very much caution because the way names are calculated in the back end in the browser in the accessibility tree is a fascinating thought experiment sometimes for
Yeah.
people. But yeah, you need to be very aware of when you're using ARIA labels and use them extremely sparingly.
Yeah.
Same with actually any ARIA techniques. I tend to have most developer conversations centered around proper use of ARIA and to back off of using it too much.
Yeah. And so ARIA, right? And so
Mhm.
it's a whole framework and it's really aimed towards, on the most part, for screen readers, but generally assistive technology, right? And so there's a lot of attributes, patterns, and all these things online that you can kind of look into. There's a whole spec around it. Um, from the same overarching organization, though it's a subsection, right, as WCAG itself, right? So the W3C, right, kind of help author a lot of these things. Um, and so for ARIA, I think what's interesting too is in HTML, it's a blessing and a curse. HTML, there's a lot of stuff behind the curtains. And so if
Mhm.
you're like, oh, I added this nav tag or I added this, particular HTML tag, like I said, the detail summary. And you're just like, I just wrote a detail summary. And okay, it did everything for me. And it's like, I'll add ARIA because I need to, because I need to, because I heard that it's necessary and things like that. You're like, well, what you didn't realize is behind the scenes, that's already all in there, right? It already has the ARIA expanded. It already has roles. It already has state information. All of this is behind the scenes. So that's why where you're kind of getting at with ARIA label, where it's like, oh, I add an ARIA label to the link that has text inside of it, and it's like,
Didn't need to do that. Yeah.
didn't need to do that. It's got text
Yep.
inside of it. It already has a label, right? So I think there's also some good heartedness where they're like, oh yeah, I want to be helpful, but not understanding how it is. And that's why it's a double-edged sword. So yeah,
Right.
I'd say a good common factor is ARIA. I think in like the manual testing space, I think a common area that's overlooked is just magnification. I
Oh
think
yeah. Hmm.
that's a with responsive design, I'd say sites are in a much better state than they were, years ago, right? Because when before responsive, it was, desktop only sites, and then it was mobile sites that were just the desktop only sites zoomed out really far, and not usable, right? So it definitely has helped, but unfortunately, there's just magnification. You just really have to be really flexible, and so the most common culprits are those stickies, right? The sticky nav, the sticky header, fixed position elements, the call to action, plus your cookie policy, plus your chat bot, and for magnification users, user with low vision that might need to enlarge it because eyesight doesn't last forever, right? And to enlarge it, they now have a screen that's just riddled with stuff.
Hmm.
And they can't even read the main content anymore. And so that's a common culprit that people overlook because these are just areas people overlook. ARIA, they overlook it because they don't really get to test as much with screen readers, understand the experience of assistive
Of course.
technology. Magnification because they're not thinking about how do I enlarge my text? How do I make that accessible? So I think a lot of the issues that are still around are because it's hard for humans to step out of their own shoes. So things to think
Right.
about is magnification users. If I enlarge my screen, if I did, in keyboard, you can do like Control plus plus. There's like zoom options in your browser and go like, I want to enlarge that. Well, get it to like 400%. How easy is it to interface, right? And there's users that have to do that because they need the text large enough, right? Um,
Right.
ARIA for the dynamic feedback, right? So screen readers,
Totally.
again, that space. Any other ones that you feel are fairly common? Because I mean, we could talk about this forever, and I also don't want
Yeah.
to,
The
in the sense of, uh,
we could.
we could. I
Yeah,
probably
let's
would
do
enjoy it
this.
very much so, but I don't know if the audience would
Yeah.
also want to listen
Yeah.
to no end.
No, I think the sticky footer, sticky navigation is an interesting one because that came of a use case specific to like desktop experiences, right? And then we got to mobile and we did a little bit of work to like reduce that problem of it taking up too much screen real estate, right? But there's also more involved in that too. Zoom, for instance, like you said, test it, see what it does. You might have to do a little tiny extra work, one additional media query, one additional stop point
Yeah.
in your CSS file to make that stop sticking at a certain point, right? Something very, very easy, honestly, to implement, but a little extra work, like a tiny couple lines of CSS, right? But it does take awareness of that and you to have that ability to test it, and that's an easy one. Much easier than the ARIA. Yeah, I agree.
And then keyboard. I think still, just because they're still in the web, there's just so much focus on. Actually, in mobile too, I think there's still a strong focus that everyone must be a touch user and not necessarily a keyboard user. And so it's just get used. It's still around, guys. It never
Yeah.
left, right?
And
Don't be afraid to just tab through a site. Don't be afraid to just hit enter keys and things like that, and just see if you can reach interfaces. That's going to really make a big difference.
yeah, and that one comes back to the you can make anything out of anything, right? You can make a normal div, a generic container, a button through the right roles and functionality in JavaScript and things like that. But again, you already have that for free there, and you don't have to then manage focus. You don't have to get that to be a focusable element through keyboard if you use the semantic HTML,
Yeah.
right? So it comes back to use the things that they seem default, they seem basic, but they're there for a reason, and they're what we all agreed to in the specs as to what the functionality is for that, and it just comes for free, right? And as that technology evolves and changes, all of that will evolve in the same way because again, we're using the semantic element, so it won't be on you as a developer to create that functionality after that.
Yeah. So as always, the way I kind of look at it is, if anyone's still listening is like, I want to know so much more. It's like, don't be afraid to reach out. You can,
Absolutely.
Christina and I would love to talk for a long time about this and all the weird oddities we see on the web. There's so many times where we're talking together and going like, why did they develop it that way? That's such a weird way to develop it. And it just causes problems, and just trying to get in the headspace around it. But the key thing is right, incorporate accessibility as just in every step of the process. Really think about that in your procurement space. And then if you are worried about those Title IIs, EAAs, all of those things out there, you can tackle it. It's really about organizationally really putting the effort behind it and really just making that ongoing due diligence. So with that, Christina, I appreciate all your time today and chatting as always.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
And with that, thanks for listening to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast. We were talking about Title II today, so if you are interested, the link to the webinar will be in the podcast description. You can find out more about AmericanEagle.com's services and today's topic in the description below as well. Like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode with others. I'm your guest host, Nick Goodrum. Bye.